What's up? And thanks for joining me, Zach Miller, your host, for another edition of the 1004 show, a part of the Zach Miller Says podcast series where we deep dive into people and learn about how they think and make specific decisions. Today, we have Claire Foster. Claire Foster is a marketing guru. And I took a page of notes, actually like a page, 2 pages almost of notes while having the conversation with her. You guys just remember, when I'm having these conversations, I'm also doing this to learn myself. So if I'm taking pages of notes, y'all should be taking pages of notes. And so I talked with Claire about, binging content and how content is now being created to be binged. Literally, people will waste their weekends watching a TV show for 13 straight hours or so. And that's something that would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago, but it's pretty much the norm now. We also talk about how to start a niche community in whatever the topic you are. We get really specific and granular in that. And then we talk about education and how education has transformed and how it will continue to evolve over the years. And I like this episode. I say that every episode. Why would I have an episode that I don't like, right? It just doesn't make sense. So if you are looking for creative ways to manipulate or hack the system to get your brand seen, this episode is for you. Claire Foster and I have a wonderful conversation about how marketing works. Let's just call it Marketing 101. Let's get into the show. So you're a marketing guru. Why don't you start off by defining marketing?
So, marketing is really deciding what your audience looks like, who is your audience, what are you selling, right? And then how do you connect those two things? So, I think it's really like just a bringing together of those three concepts: know your audience, know what you're selling, and know how to connect them.
Where do you think most people struggle in those three concepts?
So, I think different people struggle with all three facets of those concepts, right? So the first one, with really knowing your audience, is understanding who they are. Where do they work? Where do they shop? Where do they interact with people? What do they look like? What is their kind of profile, their demographic? Where do they live? What kind of behaviors do they do? So there's many ways to get at that. And I think a lot of businesses, make a lot of assumptions about their audiences. Unfortunately, we live in this digital age where it's becoming so increasingly accessible to understand what your audience is, who they are, what they do, and really start to understand some of the unique facets of your audience, right? Your customers may look very different from the customers at the business down the street. And so when you begin to kind of drill into some of the niche propositions of who your audience is, you have a really beautiful capability to define your product and how it could fit well with that audience. Another thing is your product, right? Or your services, what you're selling as a company or a business. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that they're just selling their product or they're just selling their service. But the reality is, you're never selling what you think you're selling. You're selling the way that it makes your customers feel, right? So when you're selling coffee, right, at Starbucks, there's the caffeine. Yeah, absolutely, that's part of it. But more than that, they've created an experience with the environment, with the customization there. So I think Starbucks has done a really good job there. You've talked about Chick-fil-A in the past, right? And the same thing, they've got good chicken, but is that really what they're selling? they're selling a customer service experience and making that as excellent as possible, really trying to define what their audience is looking for and meet their needs in an excellent way with customer service. And then the thing about connecting the audience to what you're selling. There's a lot of variables there, right? And in marketing, there are no silver bullets. There's no one thing that you can do, and all of a sudden your success and your profits and your margins are through the roof. I think it's really a matter of testing, right? Figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work, kind of feed the winners, starve the losers sort of concept. So I think a lot about, the Silicon Valley model of fail small, fail fast, fail forward. Number one, don't be afraid to fail, right? But when you do, fail on a small scale. Like, don't risk 50% of your marketing dollars on one thing. Think about, okay, 5% of my marketing dollars, 7% of my marketing dollars, I'm willing to risk this on testing something new. So fail small. Fail fast, meaning try it quickly. Don't commit to a 6-month agreement on something that you're testing. Try it for a week, try it for 30 days, try it on a fast scale. And then fail small, fail fast, fail forward. The failing forward part is taking what you've learned from that, right? And incorporating that into the next step. So did it work? Did it not work? Figure out how you can take that and apply it to what's next and fail forward.
Lots of good nuggets there. Okay, so we'll start with this one. So understanding an audience. I love that you talked about some things that aren't kind of your standard demographics. I think forever, and even maybe when I first got into the business world, it was, age, sex, race, stuff like that, gender. Now it's a lot of other things. Things like where the person works, where they go on vacation, what they like on Facebook, what's their slang, how do they talk, stuff like that. And I love that you talked about that, but how does someone start to find that information from a person? Because I can look at you and say, okay, this is who I think you are, but then when I learn deeper that you're someone completely different, or there's a lot more to Claire, like how do I start to learn that information from someone?
Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with listening to your customers, okay? Whether you do that through surveys or you have, a face-to-face kind of business where you're hearing anecdotes on what they think and what they're feeling. Social, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter has become a really powerful way to connect with audiences and to listen and to hear and to respond to what they're telling you. And I think you learn a lot of sort of offline information. No longer are your customers kind of just a face in a crowd. It becomes a really meaningful connection from B2C, understanding what they do. So there's some bigger corporations out there, Newstar and Jernaya and eBureau and these larger corporations that really specialize in audience segmentation, in understanding the traits that make your audience unique, and even more than just what TV shows do they watch, what radio shows do they listen to, but they can get much more granular now with different digital fingerprints, right? Like, where are you interacting online? What websites do you visit? What kinds of purchases are you making? And that gives us, as marketers, the capability to get really specific on the kinds of people that we want to target. And that's really helpful for larger corporations. I think for, entrepreneurs and startups and smaller businesses really within a local community, I can't emphasize the importance of really getting to know and understand the community networks in your area, right? So what social groups are out there that are specific to the area that you live in? What are your local newscasters, TV stations, radio stations doing? And kind of start to see organically what's happening in your area, where you can generate some interest. So I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, I have 3 daughters. They're 8 and under. But when I first became a mom, it's totally like new realm, and it's quite a bit of an adjustment for somebody to go from not having kids to having kids. And you start like looking around thinking, what am I supposed to do with these kids? There's just a lot of questions. So I lived in Lynchburg, Virginia at the time. And I started looking online for some different resources. I'm like, okay, I'm a new mom. I want to connect with other moms, or I at least want to know what there is to do for families in this area. So honestly, in my searches, like I couldn't find what I was looking for. I was kind of looking for a one-stop shop that would give me a network of other moms or dads or families that I could talk to and ask questions to and like be a part of this community.
What do you think you were searching for at that point, like specifically? Do you have any,
I,
like, what were you Googling, I guess?
I guess the Google searches, like the actual keywords would have been like mom's group
Okay.
or family activities, things to do with your kids, sort of those kinds of searches, right?
And you
So
were
it
looking
was,
for that specifically in Lynchburg? So like
I
mom group
was,
in
right?
Lynchburg type of thing?
Yeah, this was like 8 years ago. And this was before some of the apps like Nextdoor, and even before kind of Facebook really started segmenting into their community groups. And there just wasn't really a group like that in Lynchburg. So it was dual pronged approach, right? I wanted to have a community, but I also wanted it to be informative, right? I wanted to answer the questions I was having in my own mind of like, this is a pretty small town. What do I do with my kids? Can I kind of would see different families posting pictures of like going strawberry picking with their kids on the weekends. And I'm starting to think like, well, where do I find the great strawberry farms locally? I have no idea. So couldn't find what I was looking for, kind of got frustrated in the process. And then I realized, light bulb moment, I'm just going to create it. Like, if I can't find what I'm looking for, I'm going to develop what I'm looking for because I know I'm not the only one looking. So, started out with a website, Lynchburg Family, and then from there grew it into kind of an email, e-newsletter, format of providing information about, okay, upcoming family festivals, within a 60-mile radius, local day trips that you can take your kids and go to like different events, kids museums or activities. So I made a list of all the restaurants in Lynchburg, Virginia, where kids can eat free. And that was like one of the most popular blog articles. Like to this day, it probably gets one of the most high volume of impressions. So it just came down to creating really good content that answered questions and solved problems for people that were kind of in that boat of I've got kids, I need to know some information that's helpful to my family. And so it grew really quickly. So there's several thousand subscribers in the network for the e-newsletters and then the social channels on Facebook and Instagram and so on. So kind of a cool, way of tapping into a community, right? And if it doesn't exist, that doesn't mean that there isn't a community that needs it, right? Maybe you are the answer. Maybe you're the one that needs to develop a solution to a common problem, and then you're meeting a need. The most successful businesses are the ones that identify common problems and develop solutions that meet the needs of those customers.
I love that. And it sounds like when you had baby number one was when I was kind of getting back into my business career. So it was 2010, and I wasn't a mom looking for family activities. I was a guy looking to connect with other business owners, and the Chamber of Commerce wasn't cutting it. So I kind of did what you did. I went to some places, I did some searches, and I just couldn't find it. So I started hosting manual in-person meetups with other business owners. That led to a networking group, to an email list just like yours, and thousands of people attending my events and helping me get the credibility. And of course, years later, meeting you, which was obviously amazing. So do you think the key is figuring out what the keywords that you want are, and then adding your city to it or whatever that niche is to it, and that's kind of a good way to start?
I would say yes. I mean, specifically for people that are really hyper focused in one community or one city or one state, I think demographically across the US and around the world, you're going to see varying trends based on DMAs and cities and whatnot. So, it really depends on what you're offering. But if you are, you do have that local focus, I think that's absolutely the way to go. 2010 was such a great year, and there was a lot happening with, this kind of community development and into dipping your toe in the water of what's accessible here now. I mean, Facebook has even, updated their algorithms, and I think they've been really smart about not wanting to necessarily um, overemphasize the global commerce that we have today. They are showing preference even in their algorithms for local businesses, things that are community focused, and not just the giant commerce, kinds of businesses. They're doing well, and they have the advertising dollars to fund that. But then for the smaller businesses, it's really beautiful to see how customers are starting to show preference for that. The local shop local boutique mindset of wanting to support people in their own backyard and give back into their own communities.
So you have this group now, and you're, let's just say, calling it a customer profile of getting the information about that person, collecting it. At what time or in what kind of percentage of a trend do you need? Like, how do you know when something's, is it 10%? Is it 50%? Like when you start getting the same information over and over again, it seems like there's some sort of trend. How much of that trend do you need to then start building kind of marketing campaigns or specific language towards those people?
Yeah, so there's some really helpful tools out there that can help you to identify trends, right? Google Trends is one of them, and that gives you the ability to search for different keywords and search terms that are popular in the US or in your state, in your city. You can kind of drill down to what's working, what are people looking for, right? And you can even do comparisons. Okay, so you could say, are people searching for coffee or are they searching for tea? And you could see how the volume of searches would be different for those kinds of terms. So that's really helpful to inform kind of your content strategy and your marketing strategy. Another thing is absolutely analytics, right? So on your website or with your communication plans, what kind of content is getting the most impressions? What are people viewing? What are they clicking on? And so that gives you a really nice way to watch and monitor the content that's already out there, and then take learnings away from that to say, okay, for example, this article about the restaurants where kids eat free, hugely popular, continues to be popular. How can I create more content like that or within that same theme that answers questions and will provide people with what they're looking for?
All right, let's dissect that a little bit. Okay, so you have this popular post, the kids eat food in Lynchburg, and how do people get how do you get people to that website to see it for the first time? And then what are you doing to kind of keep getting people to go to it, 8 years later or however many years it's been? Because I think people talk about, you have to have good content. Well, how do you understand that content's good, right? And then how do you actually get people to it once you know that it is good, even if people aren't going to it?
That's such a good question. I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of times I think people assume, okay, I can just write this blog and publish it and then hands off, I'm done. It's going to perform well, it'll succeed. But really, I like to think of it as kind of a bicycle tire, right? So you've got the central like hub of the tire, which is your content or your website or your communication, right? And so that's absolutely integral to having a bike. You've got to have that central hub. But then, every bike has the spokes that come out from that central hub on the tire. And that's what I like to think of as distribution channels, right? So you've got to have the content. That's number one. That's your website. But the spokes, the distribution channels, would be how you're getting that out to your customers, right? So take that URL, take that website that you created and publish it out to social networks, right? Like put it in your email drip campaigns, post it to different Facebook groups, absolutely publish it on your social networks. Get it out there with other third parties if you have kind of PR relationships with other companies in your community or different news networks if you think it's newsworthy. You've got to take the next step to distributing the content that you have. I think that's where it can be a real challenge for people, is understanding what are my distribution networks, where do I have access to publish this, to get it in front of the right consumers. Social is such a great tool for businesses in this regard, because if you're making something that's really excellent and really answering questions, solving people's problems, there's going to be a natural desire on behalf of your customers to share that good news with others, right? So they might retweet it, or they're going to post it to their friend's timeline on Facebook, or they'll tag somebody in a photo on Instagram and say, hey, this was really great. I loved this experience. I think you would love it too. So social is really a powerful tool for a lot of small businesses today.
So the tire overall is the content, and the spokes are the distribution channels. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. A lot of things still to talk about. Let's talk about this. So public relations and marketing. I think a lot of people might even think that they're the same thing. How would you differentiate the two of them? And do you think public relations is a good thing to work and pair with marketing?
Yeah, great question, because I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were entirely separate, just by nature, right? Marketing being the advertising, sales, communication piece, and public relations becoming more of the newsworthy connections with other businesses, managing relationships kind of piece. Well, we've seen this blending of the two just in recent years, and part of that is social channels almost forcing that. I think, social or third party relationships were a function of public relations for the longest time, and now you've got marketing that's so integral in the customer relationship and managing outbound communication. So it's really this beautiful blending of marketing and public relations. So I'm beginning to not see a difference in the two. Honestly, I think it has to be a kind of a blended approach, because the functions there are so closely intertwined that you really want to have a very close relationship between your marketing and your public relations teams.
Well, still on that topic, how does marketing, public relations sync with the rest of the people in kind of a business or a division, so that you guys are all on the same page? So whether it's connecting with the people building it, the sales team, et cetera, the management team, how does, in its own kind of tire, how do all those things kind of cycle through together and make sure that they're gelling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it comes back to your leadership, right? And the culture in your organization of empowering the people who are within marketing, within public relations, to be responsive, to be agile, to listen well, to observe well, in terms of measurement, analytics, and data. What are they seeing? What are they hearing from customers? And how can you take that information and provide that back to other key stakeholders across the organization, right? Within product development, within customer service, to take what you're learning and what you're seeing from your audience and really push that up the funnel, so to speak, or across the organization to other stakeholders to say, look, our customers are not happy with this. This is what we're seeing they want more of. And then in doing that, you really create this kind of total quality management across the organization of saying, we want to respond well, we want to serve our customers well. So we're going to change a few things. We're going to take what we've heard and what we're learning in public relations or in social media, and apply that back to our product and our service to make it a better experience.
So we're in a really interesting period of time where forever we would watch TV shows an hour at a time, once a week, at some sort of cycle. Now, networks like Netflix, Hulu are creating content to literally be binged, right? And if you think about this, and you like, I've been talking to a lot of friends about this, and I haven't really figured out how to articulate it yet, but I think I'm right on the right point. So before we would spend 1 hour, let's say 12 times a year, and watch this TV show. Now we're taking literally an entire day to watch these shows and binge them. You probably done it. I did one last weekend. Like, it happens. So what are these businesses? What is Netflix doing that is so bingeable? Because I know they're actually creating this content to be binged. Like, I've read articles where they're saying like they want people to keep watching. And before you would watch something saying, okay, watch this next week. So like, what are they doing to get people to watch these shows in 13-hour sessions instead of just week to week? Because it's absolutely incredible to me. And I don't even want to watch TV shows. So like, Westworld is on right now. I don't know if you've watched this show, but I think it's 10 or 11 episodes, and they're halfway through. And I told my wife, I said, we're not watching this until the whole thing's done so that we can watch it back to back. Like, what are these businesses doing? What are these platforms doing to create content that is being consumed in a completely 180 cycle?
Yeah, it's so interesting, and they're so smart to tap into kind of that demand environment. Where as Americans we're just not patient. I don't want to wait until next week to see the next episode. Give it to me now. I'd rather, and I know people, maybe you're one of them that will wait until after a season has aired because they don't want to watch it every week, and commit to that kind of routine. But they'll wait until it's done and then watch the whole thing on Netflix just so they can get it all out, in one day. So, just by nature of being a customer of Netflix, we provide them with the consent to know what we're watching and the methodology behind that. The time of day, the frequency, that how often you're watching it. Are you watching it full through? And so I think they're seeing that that's what people want. It's this instant gratification of I want to know the whole show. I want to take a Saturday and just do nothing but sit on my couch and watch this season of this, show. So I think that is good feedback for them. And obviously understanding, like, okay, what's the content that people are consuming? What kinds of things do they want to see? And then informing their next round of content development and producers and screenwriters, taking elements that people most enjoyed from these viral shows and kind of working that into the next big thing.
Very interesting. So there was something else a few years ago. I don't know if Netflix does this, but I know Amazon's video platform was doing where they were just creating pilots, getting feedback on who watched it, what the feedback was, and then the stuff that was good, they would then create the full seasons. I don't know. Have you seen anything like that before?
Yeah, yeah.
So taking kind of that concept and the concept that you were just talking about with Netflix, like, this is like really like, it's really a big data play. It's really a data play where they're just taking the information and learning from that. So what do you think some of the stuff that they're pulling out that and they're learning from to then build and develop more? Because Netflix is spending $8 billion alone this year in new content. I mean, these are some pretty heavy loads, pretty heavy risk. I mean, what type of stuff do you think that they're looking for specifically to make $8 billion decisions?
Yeah, that's big decisions, right? And they don't make those decisions based on no data. They're capturing and collecting a ton of data around day parting and consumer profile, right? So, what kind of other shows are you watching on Netflix that could inform the decisions that they're going to roll into that content? So, one thing I've noticed in particular, I've got three little girls, and Netflix actually has, two profiles on my account. So it says Claire at the top, which is my profile. And then under that, it's kids. Like, they know that I'm not going to watch My Little Pony. They've realized they've broken it up into two groups, So I've got the girls that have all their kids shows, and then my shows are like The Crown. I really enjoy like all the British kind of documentaries and stuff that they're doing now too. So it's good because then they get this layered effect of knowing this consumer has kids, right? So this is the kind of consumer that she is, because we can tell that these are the shows that her kids are watching. And then we can see that as a mom, probably mid 30s, she's watching The Crown, and these are the kinds of things. And then you take all that data and you compound that across their global networks and to see these are the customers we want to continue to serve, to keep them on our network, to keep them entertained, to keep them coming back and paying that subscription fee to Netflix. We're going to continue to create this kind of content that serves them.
How can a business, how could a brand that has a far smaller budget than Netflix kind of determine how to do this on their own? What kind of techniques can they do to try and start pulling some of those concepts away to work on their own brand?
Yeah. And I think that's where, product testing, and sort of R&D comes into play. If you don't have a big budget, to roll out a product and then hope that it succeeds, research, focus groups, customer surveys, these kinds of things are really helpful, to measure what is your audience looking for, and how can we meet that need. So I think, not that you want to necessarily look at your competition to find what success looks like, but there's a lot of value in competitive analysis, right? So as much as possible, kind of looking at successful businesses that you respect, or that kind of create industry benchmarks or best practices within your business group. So what are they providing? What questions are they answering? And not that you want to just dovetail onto what they're doing, but there's a reason, that some of these corporations are so successful, because they've already found out what works and what doesn't work. So how can you take those learnings and apply it to your audience with your niche value proposition and your own message?
You said something along the lines earlier about diversifying your marketing dollars. What kind of percentages do you think should be thrown out towards certain stuff, or what's the highest amount of money that you should be spending on one kind of campaign?
So it's interesting, in marketing, there's this saying that, half of my marketing budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. We've come a long way, right? There's so many tools for measurement now, and really being able to source channels from the very first impression to a click to kind of a conversion or an inquiry or a lead, whatever you call that in your world, and then all the way down to converting that to a customer or the point of sale. So I think data, and having digital channels has really helped us with defining success, right? What you don't want to do is assume that every marketing dollar is directly attributable to a sale, because especially in traditional mediums, right? Print, um, newspapers, magazines, billboards, TV, radio, these sorts of things, even though you can kind of source it, you can say, go to our website with this extra URL. Not everybody's going to do that. A small percentage, maybe 20 or 30% of people would remember your sourced URL or your sourced phone number and actually call that. But the majority of people today are going to go to Google, right? Or another search engine, and look for you there. So obviously, search is high intent. People are actively looking for you. So in your marketing budget, you're always going to assume, oh, yeah, search is the best. People who come to us through a search engine or come organically to our website and click right through to us, that's where we want to spend all the marketing dollars. Well, that's kind of half of the picture. What you got to think about before they get to that point in the funnel is the high level awareness, right? How do they know your brand? How did they know to search for you? What other marketing channels were driving that interest to create more consumers in the bottom of the funnel? So I would say, to answer your question in terms of channels and risk management, is you want to always be trying something new that you haven't tried before, because in a moment's notice, really, channels can change, performance can change, regulations. We live in a pretty tense environment with now not being able to collect or store different pieces of consumer data. So you want to make sure to mitigate that risk by trying new things and It's like any good diversified financial portfolio. You never want to put all your eggs in one basket. It's smart to have some eggs in this basket and some in another one. Same thing with your marketing mix. So continue to invest, 80 to 90% in the channels that are working, in the channels where you say, I'm confident that search is going to drive, interest, and I'm going to spend money on Google AdWords or on Bing ads and things like this. But then make sure that you set aside, 10 to 20% of your marketing dollars on a yearly basis for trying something new, taking a jump into a channel that you haven't tried before, test something that's different, and you're not sure if it might be working, but you can at least set aside a small percentage of your budget to try something that you've never done before.
So traditional media is, it seems like it's still the most expensive way to advertise. And with some of the things that you just said, where it's very difficult to kind of understand that that's working, how does an organization understand that it's working?
So keep an eye on your website visits, right? Watch Google Analytics every day. And if you're trying traditional media, TV or maybe radio, maybe you can afford to go, spring for a billboard in your city. Watch what happens to your website visits when you take away some of those things. You'll see, at least in my experience, I've seen, dramatic drops to website visits and sort of the organic interest in a company when you start to pull away the traditional media, because there's still a number of consumers that will see that. I think with the dawn of the internet, so many people moved away from print advertising or direct mail and things like that in favor of email. With direct mail in particular, 20 years ago, you would bring in the mail and it was just tons of junk, and, half of it went in the trash, and it's noise and it's clutter. And if you wanted to break through, you had to do something really unique. Well, now email, right, has become the new junk mail, and you're filtering through your inbox and half of it is trash, and you really have to do something unique to break through. So guess what? Because that's the new noise. Direct mail, even though it can be a little more expensive, right? There's nobody doing that, right? You walk to your mailbox and it's just bills or maybe a magazine that you subscribe to. But there's an opportunity there for those who might, be interested in having like a saturation list of, really breaking through in a powerful way. So, for example, right near my house, they just opened a Publix grocery store. And I'm getting these like postcards and coupons from Publix like every other week. And it's the only like junk mail that I'm getting. And you know what? It's kind of working. I want to go to Publix now. They've got cool postcards and it's special. I feel like, oh, cool. I'm gonna get a coupon. So it's just good to think of it in terms of diversification. Try new things, go back and try things that you haven't tried in a long time. See if they're working now, and find a way to break through.
It's like bell bottoms. Everything always comes back full circle. Just sometimes it takes 20 or 30 years.
That's right. I'm holding on to those pants in my closet.
Are
They're
you
going to
really?
be cool again someday. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Well, what's something about you, Claire Foster, that people don't know about that is pretty unique about you?
So, pretty unique about Claire Foster. I was homeschooled K through 12. So, like, never went to school. The first time I ever like sat in a traditional classroom, sitting in a seat, listening to the teacher, like writing on the whiteboard. First time that ever happened was in community college. So I went around 15 years old, and went ahead to do like my gen ed courses at community college, the math and science and those kinds of things. So really appreciated that experience and the sacrifices that my parents made, honestly, because it is not easy. I'm one of 7 kids, and so my mom was a flight nurse in the Air Force, like gave up her career to stay home and raise us, and then she homeschooled all of us. Like, I don't know how she did it. She's amazing. But I really appreciated that experience because it kind of forced me into thinking outside the box, right? Like I was never one to just kind of go along with the group of what everybody else was doing. And really had an opportunity to think uniquely about what am I going to do today to make myself a better version of myself, to make myself better than what I was yesterday. And, to think creatively. Like, um, I did a lot of music growing up. I was part of different like children's choruses and singing groups, and did piano lessons. And my parents really fostered that artistic sensibility, and I really appreciated that because that has a good parlay into marketing, right? Like you want to have sort of aesthetic sensibilities or understanding of what consumers like visually, or what they appreciate, what they will feel from a product. So that's good. I did my bachelor's degree in music, and then I went back and did a master's degree in business to kind of blend those two mindsets of art and business and data.
Interesting. So on the educational side, so what, are you going to homeschool your kids, or do you homeschool your kids?
Well, they were homeschooled until they went to kindergarten.
That's cute. That's cute.
um, we're not homeschooling right now, but that may be a possibility in the future.
Like, what type of percentage do you think that's actually going to happen? Or are you just saying
I
that to
don't know.
like 0%?
Right now, it's 0% for this year. We're having them in a private school this fall, and what's actually cool about the private school is it's pretty small. It's like 60 kids in the whole school, and so my older ones, will be going into first grade and third grade, and they're actually going to be in the same classroom. Um, so I think that's kind of interesting. Like they'll have the same teacher kind of teaching them different material, but still kind of small niche to let them focus on, just what they're good at, and really specialize their curriculum for their needs.
Very cool. So I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is how the internet has really evolved and has become this big learning experience, this big data play. And education has changed because of that, and will continue, I think, to change because of that. Where do you think people are going to be learning in the future? Is the classroom setting gonna go away? Is it gonna go 100% online? I think there's a lot of people that teeter that line and say, people can learn really quickly. More apprentice schools. Like, where is education going, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question because education has changed so much just this decade, right? So it used to be the very traditional model of, face-to-face instruction. You had to go and sit in a professor's classroom to learn everything that you can from their brain. And now, with the internet and accessibility of information, right, we can like watch YouTube videos on anything that we would want to know. So it's a little bit different. As far as credentialing goes and really having certifications and degrees to do a very specific career, right? You wouldn't want your doctor, your brain surgeon, not having a very specialized accredited degree for that kind of thing. There's always going to be demand for that. We're seeing some really interesting kind of disruptive technologies with like courses, continuing education units, like LinkedIn Learning is doing this. Learn from the best professors or the best like industry leaders, thought leaders on this topic, and then you kind of sign up with a subscription model. Study.com does a similar thing. They're out in California, and you can basically do sign up for a subscription where you're paying a flat rate every month, and you watch videos, training tutorials, and then at the end of it, you can kind of take like a test, like a CLEP test sort of concept that would get you college credit, and then you can transfer that into like a 4-year university. And then, so many even public schools are forming partnerships with their local community colleges so that for a nominal fee, while you're doing your, high school courses, you're taking classes at the local community college. And by the time you graduate, or even a couple weeks before you graduate with your high school diploma, you're getting an associate's degree, right? So that is really interesting. And for 4-year schools is presenting a little bit of a challenge, to draw in, to have really transfer friendly policies that would let people transfer in an associate's degree. But then, the revenue implications of that is like for 4-year colleges, okay, so now they're bringing in an associate's degree. And instead of, spending 4 years in a university setting, they're only spending 2 years in a university setting to just get their core major courses out of the way. So it's interesting. There's a lot of things, weighing into education, specifically higher education. Today, it really does present some unique challenges.
I tend to agree with you on most of that, specifically with doctors, right? I want my doctor to know what he's doing. But kind of like you alluded to, like I don't have a business degree. I think I've done okay in business. I learned from YouTube University. I stole that line from someone, the YouTube University piece of it. And I'm constantly learning. I'm learning far more than I did, in high school. The internet really wasn't a huge thing when I was in high school. We had dial-up. People that are listening that remember dial-up, it was the worst time ever. And but I think you're right. Like credentialing degrees, like there's like certificates. These pieces are important. Like Google has Google certifications, right? All these things are important. And I think one of the challenges with your traditional kind of learning right now is the stuff that they're learning becomes outdated by the time they're even teaching it. And in some cases, like when I went to school, the stuff I was learning was like a decade behind. And I think people are frustrated with that. And I think schools have to get better at that piece too and make sure that they're up to date and teaching stuff. That is what is kind of best practices at this point. So from a degree and credentialing, accreditation kind of standpoint, do you think we're going to start seeing smaller classes, if you will, and time frame and in size, or how do you think that piece is going to work out? Or in those classrooms could be online as well.
Right. It's interesting because, I think maybe in our parents' generation, having a bachelor's degree really sets you apart from the crowd, right? A lot of people had a high school diploma, but then going for your bachelor's was a way to say, I'm taking it to the next level. And I'm a big proponent of higher education. So I've worked in higher education for the last 12 years, and I absolutely believe in the model. I believe in the power of transforming lives through that and what it can do for someone's career to set themselves apart with a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate degree. It really is something special. So I think there's going to continue to be a need for that. And like you said, maybe it will become more of a niche audience. There may be a smaller group of people that are willing to say, I'm going to take that leap, right? Because I really want to, invest in my future, invest in my family, right? Because there's a study now showing that kind of one of the common denominators in success of children is the education level of their parents, right? That's kind of an indicator of your child's educational and vocational success is what degree level do you have as an individual. So that's kind of an important, aspirational part of it too. But I don't think higher education is going away. I really believe that, it will become more competitive. We've seen some acquisitions, like the Purdue and Kaplan brands. And I think we'll start to see more of that as, it becomes increasingly competitive to reach the higher education market. And the market is not going away, right? Like there are still millions and millions of adults in the US that are looking to go back to school, whether that's online or in person, to earn their degree. Online education, has made its way, and we've seen some pretty exciting trends with the growth of that. And now it's becoming really expected that if you're going to go to college, you have to have online classes to serve the needs of working adults and families, who have other commitments and full-time jobs. You've got to serve their needs because that's going to be a significant part of the market. But really, like you said, I think it will become something that's really distinguished, for a very niche audience.
Yeah, and you're seeing schools that you've done work with are seeing double, triple, quadruple the size of their student bodies because they can get more people. And so I'm a firm believer in education. I think the way that it comes out is going to constantly be changing, like you're saying. And I love education. I think it's really, really important. but not just education. I mean, schools aren't going away because the whole alumni effect, right? I mean, that's such a big thing. And then schools that have sports, those are big money generators as well. What's something that you want to do in your life that you haven't been able to do? Something like a bucket list item.
Bucket list item. Oh man. I think early on, I really just wanted to be a mom. I wanted to have a family, and so I feel like that bucket list item is already kind of checked off. But something I'm really enjoying, is this mindset of marketing, and specifically just based on my career so far, how that translates in the higher education vertical. But I absolutely love being a marketer. I love helping businesses and corporations align themselves, kind of the value proposition, the positioning of who you are as a company and where you align to support an audience or a customer base. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing with that and want to continue in doing that.
How do you define a value proposition?
What is it that I do better than anybody else? Or what is it that I can offer as a company that nobody else is offering? So, rather than being just one company on a list of 100 companies that do something okay, find out the one thing that you do best and focus all your energy, all your efforts, all your messaging on that one thing. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and Donald Miller wrote a book called Story Brand. So he has a podcast about that concept, but his whole mantra is if you confuse, you lose. Noise is the enemy. Creating a clear message is the best way to grow your business. And I really believe that, if you're confusing people on your website by not being clear and not telling them what you do and not telling them what you want them to do as a customer, buy here, click now, we kind of need to break it down. I don't think that it's, dumbing it down or oversimplifying to make your brand and your message super clear and just really succinct and one or two sentences to trim down and explain what you do and how you do it best. That creates clarity. It creates vision. It creates this really super clear call to action, because you're explaining what you do and how that's going to solve problems for your customers.
What's something that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
Oh man.
Because I have two
That's a
pages of
really good
notes.
question. You do?
Yeah, I can't stop. I can't stop writing.
I don't know. I think we've touched on a lot of things, like coming back to that whole concept of really knowing your audience, knowing what you sell, the fact that you're not selling what you think you're selling, right? You're selling the way that it makes your customers feel. So, um, try to emphasize as much as possible what are the feelings that I want to invoke in my customer base, right? So for higher education, you're not just selling degrees, right? You're selling confidence, you're selling aspiration, you're selling hope for a better future, you're selling a sense of accomplishment, right? You're selling strength, you're selling motivation. So there's, kind of thinking when you can make that switch in your mind that you're not just providing a product or a service, you're providing an experience. You're providing your customers with something really powerful, and beautiful that's going to make their life better. That kind of enables you to turn a corner in your story, to turn a corner in where your brand is positioned in the market, to start thinking about what am I going to do to make the lives of my consumers better or help them to experience something that they've never experienced before. I think there's a lot of power in that concept.